Many people across the country are observing Indigenous Peoples Day today, which celebrates Indigenous people and honors their communities and their culture. This year marks the first time a U.S. president has formally recognized the day. President Biden issued a proclamation on Friday observing today, October 11th, as a day to honor Native Americans and their contributions to American history. Joining me now is Matthew Fletcher, professor of law and the director of the Indigenous Law and Policy Center at Michigan State University. Professor, thanks so much for taking the time to join us.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I appreciate it.
Great. Right off the bat, how significant is it that a U.S. president has formally recognized Indigenous Peoples Day?
Well, it's pretty significant. I mean, we've come full circle from 1792 when the very first proclamation was issued on Columbus Day. Christopher Columbus wasn't even a real person. The name of the person was Cristobal Colon from Italy. And so for a president to come around and say that the contributions of Indigenous peoples, of Native Americans to the United States are equal to, if not superior to that of the discoverer, so to speak, is really quite remarkable.
And yet I feel like it's in the lexicon of so many people these days. Both of my kids use it as if it's always been, but it's not. The day is not yet a federal holiday, but there is a bill in Congress proposing to make it one. What would that recognition mean to Indigenous peoples all across the country?
Well, it would set a tone for how our children are taught in schools. There is a history to the United States that is incredibly complex. And it's a benefit to all Americans to have a greater sense of what the complexities are, that there were good and bad things that came out of relationships between the United States, America, and non-Indian American citizens and the Indigenous peoples. There's an enormous amount of cultural and political give and take that has benefited the United States more generally between Indian people and non-Indian people. And so I think that that acknowledgement would really help to cement that sort of understanding.
There are a lot of ways, but if you can pinpoint a few, how have contributions by Indigenous people been overlooked throughout our nation's history?
Well, let's just start with food. About 2/3 of all the kinds of staples of food in the world comes from the Western Hemisphere. Things like chocolate and squash, so tomatoes, all of that comes from the United States, from the Indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere. Politically, Native people have been, in the past 50 years or so, been really creative, true laboratories of democracy in terms of developing new ideas on child welfare, pollution control, conservation, the kind of interactions between governments, national governments, and state, local, and tribal governments have all been tribes have really been on the cutting edge. And very few people know that tribes are really engaging in this activity.
And representation within the U.S. government, White House Interior Secretary Deb Haaland is the first Native American to hold that position. What does that kind of representation mean to Indigenous people?
Well, very specifically, it means that there is finally a high-level inclusion of Native peoples in the national government, the American government. The Department of the Interior, one could argue, was founded to deal with the, quote, Indian problem. But the problem there is that the solution involves Indian people and Native American people. And so these interactions, these major decisions that involve that implicate all Americans, that are important to all Americans, are finally being addressed from a perspective of a Native and Indigenous woman, which is really quite remarkable.
Finally, Professor, how will Indigenous people across the country be celebrating this holiday? And actually tell us how some cities have celebrated it in the past.
Well, you're starting to see more and more cities, and I think as many as 12 states have issued proclamations or even identified the date as a state or local holiday. You will see marches that involve certainly protests, but there will also be celebrations of culture and language. Native people have fought very hard to maintain their traditions in light of a lot of ignorance about Indian people, and a lot of, frankly, assimilation and oppression. And they should celebrate. We should all celebrate the differences between us, the plurality within our cultures. And you're starting to see more and more of that across the country. And it's really quite amazing.
Professor Matthew Fletcher, thanks so much for taking the time on this Indigenous Peoples Day.
Thank you very much. Miigwech.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.